This is Beat It with Joe, and you're listening to Joe Mountford. This show is about mental health for athletes and coaches. The podcast is for athletes, up-and-coming athletes, and for all the staff who support them. As a Gallup strengths coach and therapist and mindfulness coach, I interview professional athletes, coaches, and those who are working with them. I believe that mental health is vital for performance. This includes the mental wellness of coaches, management, and players. My special guest today is Garreth Ewing, a former SA men's hockey coach. Garreth coached the men's hockey team from 2019 to 2022, taking them to the Tokyo Olympics and the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. He also coached some FIH Pro League tournaments. He was definitely the man who grounded the team for the FIH Pro League, winning for the 2020, taking them to 2024. Garreth was also the assistant men's coach in 2014 to 2018. Garreth is also a mental strengths coach, and together we've had some wonderful and meaningful discussions. Garreth and I will be running a series of podcasts focusing on the coach this time, the mental health of the coach, and how we can support them. In this episode, we focus on the role mental health has to play in the performance of the coach. We look at how we can better support the coaches so that they can perform optimally, as well as how to manage oneself out of competition. We introduce the topic of living more mindfully, and I am going to bring in our guest, Garreth Ewing. Hello, Garreth.
Hello, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And I think the topic, talking about the mental health of the coach, is a topic that's maybe neglected. And we've had some fantastic discussions, and I think it's invaluable to share this information with others too. So I'm going to start by asking you, having coached at a professional level, what role do you think mental health has to play?
Look, it's got a massive role to play from a coaching point of view, because at the end of the day, however involved everybody else is in terms of players and management, the buck stops with the coach, and the coach as a leader is under immense pressure. And very seldom do they actually pay attention to their own mental health and even their own physical health. So we need to kind of open up these channels to make it something that is available to coaches, and also that just makes them be at their best. Because at the end of the day, if the coach isn't performing because of mental health burdens that they may often have placed on themselves, then it's going to ultimately cause the team to suffer at the end of the day.
Yeah. And the reality is things like pressure, the stress, anxiety, fear, performance anxiety. I mean, you feel it. That all stops with you. And I think as a coach, it's a little bit like being a CEO. You're on your own. You're expected to be totally in control and on it. And your support staff probably expect the same of you, and your players definitely. So when things go wrong, what do you think? What do you think people can do? Or if you had it all over again, what would you pass on to the next coach? What would be the message to the next coach? Like, how can we support you?
So I think the important thing is for the coach is not to isolate him or herself. You've got to be as inclusive as possible in terms of your management group, because they need to help you share the load. I think a mistake I definitely made was keeping things to myself, doing that to protect my staff, to be honest, to let them just focus on their main job. But what that ended up doing was that my job became burdensome. And there were so many distractions that I actually ended up not being my best self in that space. So the first thing I would do is make sure you're as inclusive as possible in terms of sharing that stress load, because your staff at the end of the day are supportive of you and they want you to do well. The second thing that I would focus on, which I think is really, really important, is creating a space where you can de-stress yourself. I know that's a terrible word, but to have a safe space where you can decompress, where you can disconnect from the day's stress, even if it's just for a few minutes. And that's something that's really important. That's something you can create yourself, but I do think there need to be some structures put in place to help coaches cope with these spaces.
Yeah, we've spoken about that before, and I think so many people don't have, let's call it mindfulness. They're not aware that they need that. And we're going to get into something shortly about that high performance space and then being able to sit in a non exciting space. But let's talk, can we talk more personally, in the sense of that we live in South Africa and maybe there's not a lot of money and sponsorships, and if you can maybe give the example you gave me yesterday, is when you arrive at practice and you're wanting to be the best version of yourself and you have a plan, but you've come out of a meeting, and would you like to share that?
Yeah, I think it's something that comes up, and I think it's for most coaches, not just the ones of us who are struggling with finances within their federation, is you're pulled in so many different directions. So when it's time to fully focus on the players, for example, at a training session or in a team meeting, you may have just come from an extremely fractious interaction with an administrator, or there's a struggle around money or a struggle around facilities and logistics, and you're distracted and you're elevated, and then you arrive at training and you want to present your best self again to your team, and there's a huge drain on you to be what you need to be in that moment, when you've just come from a very stressful situation and stuff that you maybe were not conditioned to look after and to learn about, on your developmental coaching journey. Yeah. Like in so many other leadership positions, you sometimes get to a position before you've acquired all the skills, and then you maybe don't have the resources around you from a support point of view. So it can be very difficult to come into a session and switch off from what happened before, so that you can give of your best. And the more often those situations happen, the harder it can be. And it ends up making it harder for you to sell your process to your players, and obviously it's a drain on you emotionally. Yeah, and I think we've spoken about this before. I mean, your role extends way beyond performing on the field. I mean, I think you had to raise money to get balls, and it turns out to be the coach's role to look for sponsorship. And so the reason I'm sharing that is that you've only got a certain amount of energy. When your mind is performing optimally, you've only got a certain amount of energy. And that energy is hopefully, in the best case scenario, being spent in the performance of the players. So if you're being drained in all other directions, that optimal energy that you have becomes less. So what you can give to your team is less. And on your very depleted resources, it's incredible what you were able to achieve with that team. I mean, it is incredible. But I think it's important for you to share that you ultimately ended up with depression, and your emotions were on a cement level, let's call it that, a concrete level, where you weren't enjoying the wins. You didn't care about didn't care about the losses, but there was nothing. You were depleted, burnt out. Absolutely. And if I reflect on it, and having spoken to other coaches and other people in leadership positions, is again that strain of wanting to be the best and do the best for the people that you are serving. You put yourself in the way of every single problem, and you put yourself in the way of every single situation. And because ultimately the accountability is with you and you feel responsible for the people around you, I put myself in that space too regularly, and I was striving to maintain an emotional equilibrium, and not overreacting too much one way or the other. And I know I didn't always get that right, but ultimately what it became is it became a numbing process, because I was trying so hard to be consistent and trying so hard to be dependable and accountable that it became a burnout situation, and it became a survival situation more than somewhere where I could, speak out and express myself. And it either would become this hugely elevated space where I would absolutely lose my shit, for want of a better word, or more often than not, I would just be completely shut down to it until I couldn't pick myself up consistently anymore. So a very difficult situation, classic burnout, which I think many people have experienced in the last 3 or 4 years, and people are becoming more aware of. But I experienced all of those symptoms until I did indeed descend into a depressive state.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. But I think if anybody from federations are listening to this, the knock-on effect of what happens, and you would agree, say you come out of a elevated, as you described it, elevated situation where your mind is, I call it like in a snow globe, where your thoughts are just chasing all over the place. And then you enter the space of the hockey field, because that's where you would go. And your players are then unsure because they don't know if you are going to be happy, calm, crazy. They're not sure what coach is bringing to the party on that day. So immediately their focus is taken off their purpose, because they're not sure of the impact that what their behavior is going to have on the coach and what the coach is going to have on the practice. So the knock-on effect is all about taking away from our outcome. It's all about taking away from what we're here to achieve because of unnecessary things. But if we had more awareness, if we had more support, if we were able to reach out for help, all those little things that you've realized now, I think may help other people so that they can be the best version of themselves to help a team perform.
Look, I'd like to think so. If there's any message that I've spoken to people about and shared, is that this is not unique to me, and challenges around stress and burnout and mental health are prevalent, and that we all need to be aware of them. And I think from an administrative point of view is understanding, the assets that you manage as an administrator of a federation, and that includes your coaching staff.
Yeah.
And that if you ask too much of them too consistently, eventually they're not going to be able to do their core job, which is helping them perform. And I think we've all been in that space where we're in a meeting space, and somebody walks in and they come in and they're like under a cloud. The body language and the way you see that person immediately tells you that they're elevated and they're not going to be in a good space. And that changes the whole mood of the room. And the coach is responsible for the mood of the team. And it's something to be aware of. I think that there's a huge conversation to be had about what are support structures for coaches and managers. Yes, we are very aware of players, and I think we're learning a lot and we're growing in that space, but we're not as aware of what coaches and leaders need as much as we are about the players. And I think it's something to start paying attention to and having more conversations about.
Yeah. And I even think as a management team, it's having that conversation within the team, just checking in. And even if you can't help the people around you, then it's being able to help them to reach out where they need to get it. And, so much focus is on exercise and breathing and nutrition and mental health of athletes, but that needs to apply to the coaches too. I mean, simple skills that we've shared are breathing techniques to help you when you're in the moment to engage the parasympathetic nervous system. And those are tools that are accessible to everybody. And it's something that you can learn to control at any stage. But I'm saying is that the management need the tools just as much as the players.
They do, absolutely. And I think what happens is this is a global phenomenon in all sports coaching, is the coach neglects themselves. in the interests of supporting everybody else. And they're actually not aware of the fact that they need those tools until it's too late. And I think you'll find some of the most successful coaches globally are the ones that are very self-aware and are able to manage their stress responses effectively. And it's something for us all to be aware of. I can talk from my own experience of breathing exercises and journaling being really, really important to me. And more recently, using exercise. And I don't like the term coping mechanism because I understand where it's coming from, but it does have a little bit of a negative connotation. It's more just being aware of yourself and understanding your own needs and being in touch with yourself, your mind and your body. And those things have been really important for me. As I said, if I could repeat things. Yeah.
Tuning into your body, tuning into your mind. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, being more comfortable to share within my management team, not always feeling the pressure to project leadership and project problem solving, would have been a lot more helpful in retrospect. But when you're in the moment, when you're in that survival state, it's a lot more difficult to even be aware of your outside world. You're just completely focused on surviving in your own space.
And if I can say, I think you got to a point where asking for help wasn't even a consideration. It was reaching out, and I'm talking about your assistant coaches and those around you. Because depression is set in, the world becomes a bit narrow. So the thought of reaching out to the people that are right there, it wasn't available in your, it wasn't available because you didn't think to do that.
Absolutely, it was there, but I couldn't see it anymore. And I think it also probably eroded trust to a certain extent, because again, my staff weren't always sure what they could expect of me or from me, but they could obviously see that I was in difficulty. So yes, it became a very difficult space, and it's something to be aware of. If you find yourself in a space of burnout and depression, is to ask for help or to find help, and that is easier said than done. But everybody will reach a point, touch wood, where you can find that space. But you have to find it, otherwise you can get into even more serious trouble.
And Gareth, would you be able to share what symptoms of burnout felt like?
So there were two aspects of it for me. There was this hyper aroused state that I would get into in competition, where I was super aware of everything going on around me and feeling very, very in control and thinking that I was high functioning. And for lots of time I was. The problem was I would stay in that space, and it would become harder and harder for me to come back down from it. So when I did come back down, I would go completely the other way, and I would just want to hide and retreat into myself, and my motivation levels and my ability to respond emotionally to anything just went away. The way I could describe it, sorry, yeah.
Adrenaline pump, like in your hyper aroused state, it was like being on a serious pump of adrenaline. So as you say, in the dugout, in the competition, in the tournaments, and then it's the serious slide down to fatigue, lack of emotion, lack of motivation, maybe feelings of hopelessness,
Very much so. And also just feeling like I couldn't get around to everything anymore. And I was almost exercising triage of what was important and what was going to get my energy. And that little portion of tasks was getting smaller and smaller and smaller as my motivation and my energy declined. Yeah. So I mean, even assessments that I did pointed out that I would just look at a set of tasks and go, you know what, I'm not doing those. I'm not even going to try. I'm going to focus on these two, and that's as good as it's going to get.
Okay.
So
admin seemed like an Everest.
Admin seemed like an Everest. Basic daily tasks just fell by the wayside. I always make a morbid joke about I've just finished tournament, now I must go and do groceries, and that stuff just stopped. that just stopped. And then it became this obsession with the next tournament, the next event, the next athlete interaction at the expense of everything else, because I didn't have enough energy for everything else. There was no more balance.
And the impact lands on your family, right? You know, that's where the not so great person arrives through the front door. And that is going to be, I'm not going to get into that today. That's going to be a follow-up podcast where we're going to talk about the link between both the professional athlete and you as the coach, how you experience it's like an addictive state. So you're chasing that high, and it's that extreme pump that you experience, and then there's the nothing, and then there's the chase, and all the symptoms and the behaviors are very similar to addictive behaviors. So we're going to talk about it at a later stage, finding a balance. And it's very hard to be balanced as an elite athlete, but it is in the downtime. It's about finding balance and trying to be still with yourself and being okay with a mundane, boring life that most of us live, and, you know, that stuff. So that's going to be a topic we'll discuss in, I think, our third podcast, because I think it's really, really relevant. But I think it's awesome and courageous to be able to share your truth, because I promise you, when other people listen to that, they're going to go, yeah, that's me.
Well, I hope so. It's something that has been with me for longer than I've been willing to admit. And it's important for people to understand, not just people in leadership positions, it's everybody really, that mental health challenges and issues around stress and burnout are things that we must be upfront about. And I actually think the younger generation should be acknowledged for the fact that they're much more open to speaking about their challenges than people of older generations, and we should respect that and take heed of it.
Yeah. I worked in addiction for many years, and I did talks on substance abuse. And I said to parents, if we could give our children an emotional vocabulary, if they were able to express how they're feeling, they wouldn't necessarily search for substances to shift that feeling, to try and get rid of that feeling. So it's really lovely to hear that. And it's true that the youngsters today are able to express, many of them are able to express how they're feeling. And in that moment, you're able to reach for help, or others are able to hear it and receive it and make change where we can. So, yeah, I think that's really. Garreth, if there were coaches out there who are listening to this, who recognize themselves that maybe they have got symptoms of burnout or really struggling, what steps do you think they can take to reach out or to stop the slippery slide?
Look, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that it's very difficult once you've started to slide to slow yourself down. So it's really important to stay in tune with yourself as much as possible, so that you can recognize the symptoms before they become overwhelming. And this is why it's really important in our daily lives to be mindful of ourselves and where we are and how we're feeling, and learning to articulate those feelings internally, and sometimes to other people, but we've got to be in touch with ourselves. Once that slide starts, it's hard to halt it until you get to the bottom.
I think journaling helped you with that, identifying that. Am I right?
Very, very much so.
Scaling your emotions 1 to 10, where you're at on that day, writing a few, okay?
I mean, I journaled, and I actually realized I've been feeling a little unsettled the last few days, and it's because I haven't been journaling and haven't been recording my sensations. So it actually felt good to go back to that when I did it this morning. And it's finding, you have to find space where you can speak to somebody. You'll find, maybe you'll be lucky and you'll still be able to want to exercise, and you'll want to, find your space in the day where you're just by yourself and you're just quiet, but it becomes harder and harder. It's really important to keep communicating with people and find the person that you can be safe with. It might be a spouse, it might be a close friend, it could also just be a coach. And by coach, I mean, you know, a performance coach, somebody who can help you work through these spaces all the time. And again, for me, before you need that deep intervention is to be aware of yourself before it starts to slip. And I hope that's something that perhaps that's my biggest message out of these conversations, is to have that awareness early before it gets too late.
Because I think I know when one is depressed, when someone says to you, go out, have a walk and exercise, it seems, again, like a mountain too high. It just, the motivation, the energy levels, all of that is really hard. And then when we're feeling really low, it's even harder to reach out for help, to get a psychologist, a therapist, even call a friend for a coffee. So, you know, those are real symptoms, and they're totally real.
I think to add to that, Joe, is it's also important to understand that even the smallest thing can make a difference. Yeah. So if you know, an extreme example is just get out of bed, to do something, to feed the dog, but find the small thing that you can do and celebrate doing that, because to get your energy moving becomes easier and easier and easier. The more often you do small little things, eventually the big things don't seem as intimidating.
Absolutely. And something you said before, and I think just general public and friends could hear this, but when you're so involved in one sport, sometimes when you sit down and have a coffee with somebody, all you don't want to talk about hockey. Yeah, it's hard, because it becomes quite, your friends are interested in what you do because obviously you're a sports coach and you do something interesting, and that's their hobby. And you know, it stopped being a hobby for many of us who reach a higher level. And it is something you got to have conversations about other things. You've got to have interests of other things. And I actually read something this morning that you've got to have spaces outside of your primary interest to be aware of, and to do things where you can just disengage. I'm actually doing an art class at the moment, which is, I'm awful at art, but it's completely different to what I normally do, and it takes me out of myself. And that's just one example. There are many things. It could be, if you're lucky enough, it could be as simple as going for a walk. Yeah. But to take yourself out of yourself, have a conversation about different things that doesn't involve online activity as well. That stuff can be important, because it's just the pause. It's the pause you need to reconnect with yourself. Fantastic. I love it that you're doing art. I think it just takes your brain in another area. But also what you said is so relevant. I remember having something else outside of the sport that you're performing in. I remember when our SA ladies went to, I think it was Tokyo, I think it was that, and they didn't perform very well. And for those coming back to coach hockey, to be only playing hockey, it was a dark space. It was very hard to go from that back into same and no different. For those of them who had a different job, a different interest, I don't know, I can see some people on social media playing paddle as well as that. It's something else. So at least your interest and your stimulation is activated elsewhere. So thank you for sharing that, because I think it's fantastic. Even with the golfers that I work with, I say, what other hobby have you got? What else can you do when you're not playing hockey, playing golf? So thank you for sharing that. Sure. But I think let's end there, Garreth, because our next podcast will be about the coach and the player, and looking at that genuine relationship, and looking at trust and how you develop that trust. But again, it's all about the mental health, the performance, understanding your players, talking on the same wavelength. And then our third podcast is going to be looking at the link to the addictive high performance thinking. So thank you for your time. And thank you very much. Really awesome. Really, really awesome. Thank you, Garreth. Take care. Yes. Bye.